Mohenjo-Daro. Picture the most advanced city on Earth, not a village, not a settlement, a metropolis of 40,000 people with running water, sewage systems, and multi-story brick buildings built 4,000 years ago on the floodplains of the Indus Valley in what is now Pakistan. Then, sometime around 1900 BCE, it ends. Not gradually, not from drought or invasion. The streets fill with skeletons. 44 of them found at surface level, unburied, mid-stride, lying exactly where they fell. And the ground beneath them has turned to glass. Excavated by John Marshall and Ernest Mackay for the Archaeological Survey of India beginning in 1922, Mohenjo-Daro was immediately recognized as one of the greatest discoveries in human history. But the anomalous zone at the city's center was harder to explain. The debris there, fused black stone, vitrified street-level rubble, shows evidence of temperatures exceeding 1,500 degrees Celsius. That is hotter than a modern glass furnace. In 1979, researcher David Davenport published analysis suggesting the epicenter debris radiated outward in a pattern consistent with a single, central, high-heat event. Not a sweeping fire, a point of origin. Archaeologist Mark K. Neuer of the University of Wisconsin has confirmed the destruction is anomalous, though he disputes the thermal interpretation. The mainstream explanation, gradual abandonment, accumulated domestic fires, doesn't fuse stone streets, and unburied skeletons don't accumulate at intersections in a slow decline. They accumulate when there isn't time to bury anyone. We may never know what happened here, but the glass in the ground remembers something we've forgotten how to name. From the ash of the Indus, we cross 10,000 kilometers of ocean and continent to the fog-covered hilltops of Scotland, where the same impossible heat left its signature, not once, but dozens of times. The vitrified forts of Scotland. Sometime between 700 and 400 BCE, the Iron Age peoples of Scotland built their hill forts from a simple technique. Walls of stacked stone threaded through with timber. Structural, practical, proven. Then something turned the stone to glass. Not at one site. Not by accident. Across at least 60 confirmed hill forts scattered the length of Scotland, from Inverness-shire down through Aberdeenshire, the walls have been fused into a solid, glassy, slag-like mass. The rock didn't burn. It melted. Antiquarian John Williams first documented this systematically in 1777. But it was the 20th century's most influential archaeologist, V. Gordon Childe, who put the mystery to its hardest test. In 1937, Childe and Wallace Thornycroft stacked timber against stone walls and set them alight in a controlled experiment. The result was surface scorching, not vitrification. A 1991 study by archaeologist Ian Ralston confirmed that full-wall vitrification at Finnavon Fort required temperatures exceeding 1,050 degrees Celsius, sustained long enough to penetrate a wall core approximately 1.5 meters thick. No wood fire achieves this. No ancient fuel source has ever been made to replicate it in experiment. The mainstream explanation is that the builders did this deliberately, a construction technique to strengthen the walls. But Childe's own experiments proved vitrification weakens the structure. And no Celtic oral tradition, no Roman account, no written source anywhere describes building a wall this way on purpose. 60 sites showing the same impossible signature, and not one memory of how it was done. Some researchers quietly ask whether these forts were built on ground already scarred by something far older. In Scotland, the heat left glass. But thousands of miles south, in the Saharan desert, it left something even stranger. A field of perfect glass the size of a country, and a king who wore a piece of it around his neck for eternity. The Libyan Desert Glass Field. Spread across 6,500 square kilometers of the Sahara, straddling the border between Egypt and Libya, the sand has been fused into pale yellow glass, not pebbles. Tons of it distributed across a stretch of desert larger than some European nations. Geologist L.J. Spencer of London's Natural History Museum first documented it in 1933 and could not explain it. 80 years later, neither can we, not fully. The glass is 98% pure silica, purer than anything humans manufacture, fused at temperatures above 1,800 degrees Celsius. That is hotter than the surface of flowing lava. There is no volcanic activity in the region. There is no impact crater. The nearest proposed crater lies hundreds of kilometers away and predates the glass by millions of years. In 2013, geologist John Kramers and colleagues published findings in Earth and Planetary Science letters proposing a comet airburst, a high-altitude explosion generating a thermal pulse, as the most plausible mechanism. But the 1908 Tunguska event, the largest documented airburst in recorded history, did not vitrify a single stone beneath it. Then there is Tutankhamun. In 1996, researcher Vincenzo De Michele confirmed that the carved scarab at the center of the pharaoh's most sacred ceremonial pectoral, the jewel placed directly over his heart for the afterlife, was made from Libyan desert glass. The most powerful king in the ancient world had access to every gemstone on earth. He chose this. Some researchers ask what the ancient Egyptians understood about this glass that we are still, a century later, trying to work out with laboratory equipment. From the desert floor, we climb 4,000 meters into the Andes, where a fortress built from 200-ton stones holds a secret no one in mainstream archaeology has put in a textbook. Sacsayhuaman. You've heard about the stones. The ones that fit so perfectly, no blade of paper slides between them. The ones weighing up to 200 tons, hauled from quarries 35 kilometers away, lifted and placed without iron tools or the wheel. That part, at least, has a mainstream answer. Extraordinary patience, extraordinary manpower, extraordinary time. But here is what the tour guides don't mention. At the contact surfaces between certain megalithic blocks, there is a thin layer of silicate glass. The limestone, at the precise faces where the stones touch, has been partially fused. Dutch engineer Jan-Peter de Jong and researcher Christopher Jordan documented this anomaly at Sacsayhuaman, the Inca fortress overlooking Cusco, Peru, constructed around the early 1500s. Limestone fusion begins at approximately 900 degrees Celsius. A fire applied to the outside of an assembled wall does not penetrate to the joining surfaces between stones this size. The thermal mass is simply too great. The heat would have had to be present at the moment of contact, which means, if the analysis is correct, the joining method was also the fusing method. What makes this stranger is the testimony. Spanish chronicler Garcilaso de la Vega, writing in 1609, recorded Inca oral tradition describing the stones being softened before placement. Juan de Betanzos, writing in 1551, collected accounts of builders using a plant juice to make stone malleable. Historians dismiss this for 4 centuries, but dismissing it requires ignoring both the written record and the physical one simultaneously. The fortress survived the catastrophic 1650 Cusco earthquake, while modern structures around it collapsed. A resilience consistent, some researchers note, with a superior molecular bond at the contact surfaces. Whether that bond came from patience or from something else, we genuinely do not know. From the Andes, deeper into mystery, this time to a remote Sinai plateau, where the greatest archaeologist of his era climbed to a forgotten temple and found glass that should not exist inside it. Serbit el Kadim. In 1904, Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie, the man who essentially invented modern field archaeology, climbed to a remote plateau in the Sinai Peninsula to excavate an ancient Egyptian temple complex dedicated to the goddess Hathor. The site had been used for turquoise and copper mining for nearly 900 years, from roughly the 12th dynasty through the New Kingdom. Petrie found extraordinary things: Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions, the ancestor of nearly every modern alphabet, remarkable temple architecture. And covering sections of the floor and walls, a strange blue-green glassy material he could not identify. Subsequent analysis of this material revealed something that the copper smelting explanation, the standard mainstream answer for any vitreous residue at a mining site, cannot account for. The glass contains platinum group metals, specifically concentrations of iridium and osmium fused into the silica matrix. Copper smelting operates at approximately 1,085 degrees Celsius. Mobilizing platinum group metals requires temperatures above 1,700 degrees Celsius. That is a gap of over 600 degrees, not a rounding error, not an approximation, but a fundamental physical impossibility under the proposed mechanism. Iridium is one of the rarest elements in Earth's crust. Its concentrated presence in ancient temple glass is an anomaly that researchers have linked to only two known processes: cosmic impact debris and extreme plasma events. The mainstream calls it smelting slag, but smelting slag does not contain iridium. Some researchers ask whether Petrie didn't find evidence of an industrial process at all, but rather evidence of an event so anomalous that the ancient Egyptians built a temple on the site precisely because of what they found there. From a temple built around impossible glass, we moved to a temple that became impossible glass, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, whose marble columns did not just burn, they flowed. The Temple of Artemis at Ephesus. The ancient world had 7 wonders. By most ancient accounts, this was the greatest of them. 127 marble columns, each standing 18 meters tall, holding a roof that seemed to float above the western coast of what is now Turkey. On a single night in 356 BCE, a man named Herostratus set fire to the wooden roof to make himself famous. The temple burned. And when British Museum archaeologist John Turtle Wood excavated the foundations between 1869 and 1874, and D.G. Hogarth continued the work in 1904, they found something marble is not supposed to do. It had flowed. Marble does not burn. At approximately 840 degrees Celsius, calcium carbonate breaks down into calcium oxide and carbon dioxide. The stone crumbles to powder. To achieve plastic deformation in marble, to make it bend and pool directionally, requires temperatures exceeding 1,300 degrees Celsius, sustained across the entire structure. A burning wooden roof generates intense heat at ceiling level. Convection carries that heat upward, not downward, through 18 meters of solid marble column to the foundation stones. The physics of an arson fire simply do not place 1,300-degree heat at floor level. More troubling, earlier foundation levels, predating the 356 BCE destruction, show the same deformation pattern. Hogarth's documentation describes foundation blocks in positions inconsistent with simple collapse, showing base deformation suggestive of material that moved under load while partially plastic. Ancient sources, including Strabo, describe the post-fire debris as requiring clearance in terms more consistent with a viscous flow than with rubble or ash. Weathering produces surface dissolution. It does not produce directional pooling in the base of a marble column. Something happened at Ephesus that the Herostratus story does not explain, and it may have happened more than once. From the Turkish coast, we travel east into the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, to a palace where the sculpted faces of gods and warriors survived an inferno perfectly, while everything below their waists turned into pools. The burned palace of Nimrud. The Neo-Assyrian Empire at its height was the most powerful military force the ancient world had yet produced. Its royal palace at Nimrud, ancient Kalhu, 30 kilometers southeast of modern Mosul in Iraq, was lined with kilometer after kilometer of alabaster relief panels. Carved warriors, winged gods. Royal hunts rendered with extraordinary precision. Austin Henry Layard excavated the site for the British Museum between 1845 and 1851 and was overwhelmed by what he found. When the Babylonian Median coalition sacked and burned the city in 612 BCE, those panels did not simply char. In multiple sections across at least 3 separate wings of the Northwest Palace, the alabaster had flowed. The upper portions of the carved reliefs, the faces, the wings, the fine detail, remained crisp and intact. The lower halves had pooled toward the floor. Alabaster, calcium sulfate dihydrate, enters a plastic, flowable state at approximately 700 to 800 degrees Celsius. That temperature is achievable in an ancient structure fire. What is not achievable is the directionality. In any burning building, heat travels upward by convection. The hottest zone is at ceiling level, not floor level. Panels that are detailed and crisp at the top while melted and pooled at the bottom describe a heat source that moved outward from below or radiated from the stone's level rather than descending from a burning ceiling above. The pattern is inverted from what any structural fire produces. The 612 BCE destruction is one of the best documented events in ancient Near Eastern history, recorded across Babylonian chronicles, Assyrian administrative records, and the Hebrew Bible. Not one source describes a weapon that matches the thermal signature Layard found in the ground. Some researchers have noted that this profile, intense, brief, emanating from below, is more consistent with a ground-level pressure event than with any military fire of the period. At Nimrud, the heat was fast and impossibly directional. In Anatolia, at the oldest continuously inhabited settlement ever found, the heat was something else entirely. Rhythmic, deliberate, and 18 times repeated. Çatalhöyük's 18 burn cycles. On the Konya Plain in south-central Turkey, sometime around 7500 BCE, people began building the largest settlement on Earth. No streets, no public squares. Just houses packed together so tightly they shared walls, entered only through holes in the roof. At its peak, Çatalhöyük housed between 3,000 and 8,000 people. James Mellart first excavated it in 1958 and could barely process what the stratigraphy was showing. 18 distinct occupation levels, each separated by a burn layer. Each burn layer showing vitrified mud brick with temperatures confirmed by thermoluminescence analysis at between 850 and 950 degrees Celsius. And each new building phase constructed directly on top of the ash identically as if the destruction itself were the foundation. Ian Hodder's Cambridge team, re-excavating from 1993 onward and publishing extensively in the Çatalhöyük Research Project volumes, documented what Mellart had found. The burning is systematic. It covers entire building phases. It is not random. The temperature profile across a single burn layer is consistent, not variable the way accidental fires spread unevenly through a settlement. For the heat to be uniform across hundreds of mud brick structures simultaneously, they would all have had to ignite at the same intensity at the same moment. The mainstream explanation is a ritual closing ceremony, a known Neolithic practice of burning a house before abandonment. Controlled, symbolic, intentional. But ritual fires are not glass furnaces. A controlled bonfire in a small mud brick room does not vitrify the walls. And the consistency of 950 degrees across hundreds of structures simultaneously doesn't look like hundreds of individual households performing separate private ceremonies. It looks like one event preserved in the ground 18 separate times across 2,000 years of human memory. Someone was commemorating something. The question some researchers ask is whether the ceremony came first, or whether the burning did. From Anatolia's plains, we descend to the Bolivian Altiplano, nearly 4,000 meters above sea level, where the stones don't show burning. They show something slower, and in some ways stranger. Tiahuanaco. Arthur Poznański spent 40 years at Tiahuanaco. He measured every stone. He mapped every alignment. He published 4 volumes on the site in 1945 titled Tiahuanacu, The Cradle of American Man, concluding from astronomical precession calculations that the original construction predated its accepted dating by thousands of years. A claim mainstream archaeology rejects but has never entirely silenced. What Poznański also documented, and what subsequent researchers including engineer Jan Peter de Jong have returned to, are the surface features of the andesite monoliths, directional ridges and curved depressions that do not match tool marks, do not match wind erosion patterns, and do not match the isotropic rounding that chemical weathering produces. They match in texture and directionality the surface of a material that was briefly liquid. Andesite is a volcanic igneous rock. Under normal surface conditions, it does not flow. To achieve plastic deformation in andesite requires temperatures above 900 degrees Celsius. The site sits in the Bolivian Altiplano at 3,841 meters above sea level, with no volcanic activity anywhere in the region. The blocks themselves, some weighing up to 130 tons, were transported from quarries across Lake Titicaca, approximately 90 kilometers away. Multiple blocks show H-shaped channels cut to receive poured metal joining clamps, a technique appearing identically at Sacsayhuaman, at ancient Egyptian sites, and at Angkor Wat in cultures that supposedly never met. The Gate of the Sun, carved from a single 10-ton andesite block, bears a crack through its central figure that several researchers have proposed was caused by thermal shock. Rapid heating followed by rapid cooling of a material under stress. The mainstream attributes all surface anomalies at Tiahuanaco to volcanic flow banding or long-term erosion. But volcanic flow banding is a microstructural feature. It doesn't produce visible directional ridges on a carved surface, and the marks reportedly appear on protected internal faces as well as exposed external ones. We may never settle this, but the H-shaped clamps alone suggest someone with a very specific engineering manual was working across 5 continents simultaneously. Everything we've examined tonight was destroyed by something. Our final site was destroyed, excavated, studied for decades by an active scientific team, and its most anomalous layer still carries a thermal signature that no proposed military cause can fully account for: Tel Es-Safi. Around 830 BCE, the city of Gath, the largest Philistine metropolis in the ancient Levant, the city the Hebrew Bible names as the home of Goliath, was erased. Not damaged, not conquered and occupied. Erased so completely that Professor Aaron Mayer of Bar Ilan University, leading one of the longest-running active excavations in Israel since 1996, describes the destruction layer as the most total single-event destruction stratum in the southern Levant. Covering an estimated 100 acres, the layer contains pottery, mud brick, organic material, and stone co-fused into a single matrix at temperatures archaeologists have estimated above 1,000 degrees Celsius. The historical attribution goes to Hazael, the Aramean king of Damascus, whose campaigns are documented in Assyrian records and referenced in the Hebrew Bible. The Tel Dan Stele, dated to approximately 840 BCE and the oldest confirmed extra-biblical reference to the House of David, mentions Gath in the context of Hazael's campaigns. Amos 6:2 treats Gath's total destruction as a known fact, a prophetic shorthand for annihilation. Hazael destroyed the city. That part is not in dispute. What is in dispute is the mechanism. A military siege produces fire that spreads sequentially, unevenly, hotter at certain points, cooler at others. The co-fusion matrix at Tel-e-Safi is described as uniform. Organic and inorganic material sintered together simultaneously across the full extent of the layer. Simultaneous sintering across 100 acres requires a single, near-instantaneous heat event, not a spreading military fire. No Iron Age siege weapon achieves this. Meir's team has not published a final thermal analysis, and the site remains actively excavated. But some researchers have asked whether the destruction layer's chemical profile, its uniformity, its thermal intensity, its lack of a central hotpoint, resembles something other than a military action. Whether a city famous enough to become a biblical metaphor for total destruction might have been destroyed by something Hazael simply arrived to witness and claimed as his own. 10 sites, 6 continents, 5,000 years of human civilization. And at every single one, the same question buried in the ground. Where did the heat come from? The mainstream answers are not dishonest. Vitrified forts could be deliberate construction. Desert glass could be a comet. Flowing alabaster could be an unusually concentrated fire. Each individual explanation is at least possible. What strains credibility is needing 10 separate coincidences for 10 sites showing the same physical anomaly separated by oceans and millennia in cultures that by every conventional account never spoke to one another. Most people walk through museums, read the placards, and accept the textbook answer. You made it here, which means you're not most people. This channel exists for the ones who keep looking past the placard. Hit subscribe and go to the comments. Pick the one site from this list that you think has the strongest case and tell us why. The floor is yours. Stone doesn't forget. Every temperature, every force, every event that touched it is recorded in the molecular structure for millions of years. These ruins are not mysteries. They are receipts. The question is who left them.